Yes.
Yes, and I'm
So-
starting the YouTube.
So, good morning, everyone. Sunday, April 4th, 2021.
Happy Easter.
Easter Sunday. So happy Easter to everyone.
What? It's your birthday, Emily? Oh.
Yes, but this year I've decided to share it with the reincarnation of Jesus. So he's very
How
welcome.
kind. I'm sure he's happy to share it with you.
Well, happy
Thank
birthday,
you.
Emily.
Thank you.
Mm.
So, we always contemplate what will we talk about, and it seems that with it being Easter Sunday, the theme of a sacrifice is in the air, and I thought I would share some reflections, and we'll share some reflections as well. So, in the Abrahamic traditions, sacrifice was very, very critical. And one of the critical tales in the Old Testament is the story of God, as it were, testing Abraham to see if he would sacrifice his son. And clearly, that was occurring in some kind of context where a sacrifice already made some sense. And the question was, would a father, at the behest of God, give up everything for that God? That central image becomes revivified and transformed in the story of Jesus within the Christian tradition, of Jesus being sacrificed by the Father, who is sacrificing the Son. And in this case, the sacrifice is for the sake of relieving all humans of their transgressions. It's a powerful, powerful image. It certainly grabs us and is very, very animating. And we honor it on this Sunday, Easter Sunday. And we honor it by trying to understand some of the values that are embodied in it, that are illustrated in it. And clearly, sacrifice refers to taking something that is valuable and offering it for some other, often higher purpose. So it turns out that in India, the religious context within which Buddha arose was also one in which sacrifice occurred. In one of the very, very earliest teachings in what's called the Digha Nikaya, the longer teachings, the longer discourses of the Buddha, is a very, very beautiful discourse where the sacrifice was a very, very formalized and it was kind of within the purview of the priests, the Brahmin priests in ancient India. And what Gautama did within the context of starting Buddhism was he took many, many of the words and concepts that were alive and had meaning for the people in the culture, and he transformed them. He translated them into something else. So that whole discourse takes the metaphor of sacrificing a cow for the sake of the deities and transforms it into an ethical metaphor that individuals who are practicing the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, are making a sacrifice for the sake of liberation, their own becoming free from suffering, and of course, the benefit of all sentient beings, benefit of beings and others. And so the literal metaphor of literal act of taking a life, whether it be an animal life or a human life, that we've seen in other religious contexts. In Buddhism, at the very, very outset, becomes ethicalized. And the idea of doing activities for the sake of something larger, that larger in the context of Buddhism is freedom, and also for the sake of others. So when we look at Buddhist teachings, there are many, many teachings that can be understood within the context of a kind of framework of sacrifice, although that language recedes further and further into the background. But the milieu of doing something that is a kind of giving up, and that giving up having a higher purpose, remains throughout. So even when we look at the six perfections, the modes of behavior that animate the Mahayana practice of being a bodhisattva, being a being who is oriented towards illumination, first illumination for oneself and then illumination for others. If we look even at the first two of the perfections, the first is moral behavior, which involves an enormous amount of sacrifice and orienting to something larger, where one often is either by way of omission, giving things up, or by way of dedication of certain behaviors. One's framework is to something larger, freedom, freedom internally, and freedom externally. The second perfection is dana, or generosity. And there too, I mean, it's the very, very core of any kind of sacrifice is the attitude of giving something up for something else. And so we practice generosity as a way of letting go of things. You know, the core of something that we give up in Buddhist practice is adhering to some kind of fixed, autonomous, independently existing sense of self. We occur, I mean, persons occur. We are psychological and emotional beings. This is true, but we are not forever existent, independent somethings that aren't subject to enormous change and moment to moment arising and ceasing and ultimately dying. And we all pretty much as humans come into life with an inclination to holding on to some sense of self. And it's certainly not something that any of us diminishes easily. But our practice is,
Sorry.
hold on,
Sorry.
our practice is one of giving things up so that the holding onto a sense of self, the clinging onto a sense of self, the adhering to a sense of self becomes thinner and weaker. And so we appreciate that we do that within a kind of attitude of sacrifice. One of the most interesting practices, and I'll probably be handing the baton over to Anne in a moment on this and other observations, is that the practice of taking and giving, Donglin, which is very, very popular in Tibet. And we teach it and we practice it. And it has to do with an attitude of, it's very, very much a sacrificial perspective within which we start with spaciousness and we actually appreciate whatever experiences we're having, especially difficult experiences, but within a kind of attitude of sacrifice, of taking our difficulty as a touchstone. We then make the aspiration, and it is an aspiration. May, with our experience of difficulty, may we take on the difficulty of all beings. And then we also have the aspiration of whatever joy and happiness we have, may we share and give that up as well to all sentient beings. May all beings, whatever pleasure we may be experiencing, we have an attitude of sacrifice, of sharing. We're offering it to others. So we're very, very much animated today and inspired by the image and the story and the history of Christianity and the image of Jesus making this ultimate sacrifice for the sake of humanity, and all the serious practitioners who followed in his footsteps, taking that motivation, service of kindness, of peace, to animate their spiritual life. I'll hand it to you, Annie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So the beating heart, of course, behind these practices, behind what happened on Good Friday, what the arisenness of Easter Sunday, the sharing and giving, generosity that Harvey describes, the beating heart of that is love, of course. And that really is something that is a very personal kind of experience, the experience of love. And so it's interesting to consider how, in different ways, in both in Asia, if we speak of India, and in the West, there was a moment, we'll start with the moment that Harvey briefly described, of Buddhism arising in India in a culture of sacrifice, blood sacrifice, very elaborate rituals that only the priests, the Brahmins, knew how to do. And so if you wanted the auspicious relationship with the deities that came from sacrifice, you hired some priests to do the ritual for you. And that, we call that Brahmanical strand of Indian religions. It remains to this day. And at the same time, what was going on in India already prior to the Buddha's birth was people who felt that there was something to discover more internally. They were the wanderers, the seekers, the sannyasis going out into the forest, into the jungle, sitting, exploring, doing meditation, doing ascetic practices. And Buddha was really one of these sannyasi, part of that movement, wanting to explore the nature of suffering, what was causing suffering, what could allow it to cease, and what would be the path to it. As you know, the Four Noble Truths, or as we say, the Four Ennobling Truths, the core heart of Buddhist practice. And in the West, we have, the Protestant Revolution, which in a sense was partly about, no, we don't need priests between us and the divine. We confront, God directly through our prayers. So in Buddhist practice, we are very much in the mode of looking into our own experience in accordance with various instructions on the view, on meditation, on conduct, behavior. That means ethics. And we try to absorb these and live by them through daily practice, through gradually training away, refining away, dissolving our more coarse and unhealthy, unwholesome tendencies, which we all have. Desire, hatred, ignorance, jealousy, pride are the classic ones in Buddhism. And we all know and, don't like that much to talk about, perhaps, how we ourselves have tendencies in these directions. And so we seek through our practice to dissolve these. But it's not just a matter of, particularly in the Mahayana, the great vehicle, which begins about 500 years after the historical Buddhist time. We want to evolve also to develop merit, positivity, positive qualities. For example, the 6 perfections of giving, ethics, patience, joyful endeavor, concentration, wisdom, right? These are qualities that can blossom in us. And the very word that gets translated into English as enlightenment or awakening, right? Jangjup, Bodhi means awakening. Buddha, the root of the name Buddha is Bud in Sanskrit, means to awaken. So our process on the path, we can say, is a process of dissolving and evolving. And the two Tibetan, the word Bodhi or Bud gets translated into Tibetan into 2 syllables, and many of you know this very well. And it's kind of telling in terms of the path itself. There's Jang, which means to purify, to dissolve, to, begone these wrongful, unhealthy tendencies that seem to perfume all of my behavior. And may there be blossoming. May my capacity for generosity, for love, for compassion, for boundless states, which we'll sing about in the beginning of the next hour, may these evolve. The jup, that's the second part of the word that in Tibetan translates what we in English say enlightenment or awakening, dissolving and evolving. So the practice of the Tonglen that Harvey mentioned, giving and taking, is a part of our dissolving and evolving in the way that we do it. And I think we'll find a way this morning to introduce it into the practice that we usually do. Fundamentally, though, before we get to that, so the idea of generosity, as Harvey suggested, is kind of like the emotional side of what we call sacrifice, if we put it that way. Sacrifice is a kind of act. It is a giving up. In many cultures, there's blood sacrifice. Buddha, from the beginning, made that outside the circumference of what Buddhists would practice. But there is the sacrifice of, in all traditions also, of one's time, attention, giving up certain ways of behaving, give up for Lent, for example. It's a sacrifice. It's a more ethicized, Harvey said, or aestheticized form of sacrifice, but it is a giving up. So in cultivating the perfection of generosity, which sometimes is called the fundamental perfection, it really includes all the others. there are ways in which wisdom also includes all the others, but I want to speak about generosity. So, as we hear again and again, God gave his only begotten son, to heal the world. Well, that's a huge sacrifice. Well, what about us? What do we do? We have in the Buddha's stories, the Jataka tales, the early previous lives of the Buddha. The Buddha had many, many lives when he, like us now, was on his way to complete enlightenment. And part of the path to enlightenment involves a tremendous surge of positivity in terms of ethics and kindness and goodness. So generosity is a tremendous way of becoming more filled with merit. And this empowers our wisdom. And that's a bottom line premise of Buddhism, that wholesome behavior, that means of body, speech, mind, we give up the 10 wrong deeds and we practice the 10 wholesome deeds, so that we will have the wherewithal to accomplish this amazing wisdom which sees through the illusion of self, which deludes us into all of these wrongful acts that keep us limited, that keep us from evolving. So generosity is really important. And there are stories in Buddhism of epic forms of generosity. Kind of scary, maybe, Buddha in empathy with starving baby tigers whose mother is too weak to feed them, sacrifices his body to feed the tiger. Well, are we supposed to do that? Are we supposed to, new converts to Buddhism, and I, sometimes feel, well, I should give up my house. I shouldn't have anything. What should I do? So here, on the advice of the first Tibetan teacher I studied with in this was Khyentse Ngalen Lake, and telling the story of Shariputra, one of the disciples of the Buddha, who some demonish person, really to test him and taunt him, comes and asks for his hand. Would you give me, please cut off your hand. I need it. I need it. I need it. Well, Shariputra is trying to cultivate the paramita, the perfection of giving. And so he cuts off his right hand and he hands it to him with his left hand, which in India is a terrible thing to do. You never give anybody anything with your left hand. And this demon is just furious. How can you do this? How can you do this? And Shariputra is so despondent. He says, look what I did. I cut off my hand and this person still isn't satisfied. I'm not doing any more giving. And my teacher's comment, and perhaps the Buddhist comment at this time, was you have to use wisdom in what it is possible for you to give. We are enjoined to give that which we can give without regret. Not, oh, gee, did I really give that away? And so the offering bowls that you may have noticed in temples, we put water in them. And one of the things that's said about that is sometimes it's saffron water, sometimes there's food and so on. But the comment about the water is because water is, nowadays, I think water is becoming a different kind of commodity. But in general, one thinks of water as something that, you will give without miserliness. Happy to put 7 bowls of water on the altar each morning. And the other thing is, since the practice of the seekers like ourselves, we have to work with our own capacity. So we have to know what we're capable of giving without regret. And that takes a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of self-reflection. And it also takes the experience of having received generosity. This is really important. So in the Buddhist tradition, we think of the kindness of our mothers, the generosity of people who raised us, the kindness of friends, the kindness of workers in other lands who grow food for us, create clothing for us. And we remember, actually, as part of our practice, acts of kindness that we have experienced so that we know what that feels like. So that when we move to offer kindness to someone else, it's not like pouring from an empty vessel. Oh, I know what kindness feels like. I may have experienced a lot of hardship in my life and maybe bad parenting. But somewhere in my life, I can walk and I can talk. There has been kindness. Someone has shown me the way to some degree. And so we take time as practitioners in our lives to reflect on these precious circumstances in which we live and remember make it quite a specific act of kindness, and maybe, a certain Easter Sunday, I got to color eggs, and my mother, who didn't really probably had other things to do, she took me out and we bought dye for the eggs, Christmas presents, Hanukkah presents, just kindness, any kind of kindness. For some people, the humans are just too difficult, and we think of the kindness of our animal friends, right? To get an experience really of having been loved and to let that, melt into your heart and just be part of what you carry around in your sense of being. And that begins to make it more, that makes it easier both to dissolve wrongdoing and to evolve into a generosity. And both of those, the giving up and the generosity, are, in Tibetan we say chiba, to offer. They're ways of offering to the universe and to oneself, to one's own practice. So we think of this today. And we can take a moment. I think I saw some of you reflecting on acts of kindness that you have received. Very appropriate Easter Sunday meditation. Invite you to reflect on that. And we will pause till we begin our practice at 11.
I just want to welcome Janine and Claudia, who I haven't seen before. And
or not for a while anyway. We've seen you, Janine.
Maybe we can
and also
ask
Ranjit.
And Ranjit.
I don't think we've seen you before.
I think I've seen
nice
Ranjit,
to see you.
Maybe Emily, in the chat, you can put in a link so that people can be sure to get on our newsletter, sign up for our newsletter. And we will be taking a short break before our meditation. We'll have meditation for about an hour, and then we will have what's called Dharma conversation, where we'll gather and just have a chance to actually talk about some things with our fellow Sangha members in a communal context. So again, welcome, welcome. We're so happy you all came.
Just rest for a minute.